It's you I like, not the things you wear, not the way you do your hair, but it's you I like. The way you are right now, the way down deep inside you, not the things that hide you, not your toys, they're just beside you. It's you I like, every part of you, your skin, your eyes, your feelings, whether old or new. I hope that you'll remember, even when you're feeling blue, that it's you I like, it's you, yourself, it's you.
Whoa, John Dankosky. All right, that was the past, but now we're going to the present. Good morning, folks, and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines and the stories that make our community tick. John Dankosky, the man you just heard in an older video, has been making our community tick for 25 years. John has been the go-to statewide radio voice on the big issues facing New Haven and Connecticut. As a news director and talk show host for WNPR, now the leading place where we get our news and radio, he was a daily fixture in our lives as host of the morning program Where We Live. New England got to know him through Next. The country got to know him through his slots on NPR's Science Fridays. Now John is opening a new chapter in his life. He's here in the WNHH studio. Tell us about that. Welcome to WNHH, John.
Thank you so much. It's always great to be here, and it's great to be in the studio and great to be part of this community. Thank you for playing that tape, too. I didn't realize I sounded so nervous singing to you. My goodness, my voice was quavering.
I don't know. When I tear up when I do it. It was so sweet you came in. That was during a fundraising drive. Just so you know, just to get it out of the way, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to John Dankosky at WNHH. We're a 4-year-old community radio station, and while we he was really the person who taught us how to do it. Like I just read to you from a page that had my opening statements, and now I have a little page that has something called resets, where anytime I forget what to say and I just need to get the ball rolling again and pivot, I have that written out without having scripts to read. And John taught us that. He came and trained our whole staff. So John, you are the patron saint of WNHH.
That's nice of you to say. I'm just glad to hear you guys are doing so well, and it's amazing. I mean, this has been going now for all these years, and you keep cranking out all these conversations. I can't even believe how much it's grown, and I'm really very proud of it, and of course of the Independent too.
Great. I hope you could take a little nachas from it. Okay, so how is freedom? John Dankosky, this month.
Yeah.
As of this month, you are no longer, after a quarter century,
yes,
working for WNPR. You decided, they had new management, and you just decided this was a time to pivot at a moment of change.
Yeah. So 25 years in August of this year.
So you did make it official. It wasn't like 24 years and 10 months.
No. It was literally in
people
August.
Cheat on those last months.
It was my 25th anniversary. It was also my 50th birthday.
Oh.
And everything sort of came together. And at the same point, the management offered a buyout to people who'd been there at Connecticut Public for 20 years or longer. And it's scary to think about that after doing something for such a long time and having built a news operation and working with so many people you obviously love very much. But I took it as a sign that it was probably time to try something new, and now's a good time to try something new. There's a lot of interesting things happening in our business. There's a lot of interesting things happening in the world I want to cover. And so I kind of took the plunge. Yeah, November 1st was my last day. Earlier that week, I'd had the last Wheelhouse, my weekly news roundtable, a program that you appeared on quite a bit, Paul. And I'm gonna step into a little bit of an unknown here, first time in a long time.
No, I think a lot of our listeners, John, can relate to those decisions you make in your life. When to walk away from something comfortable that you've been doing a long time. And I did it once in my life, and it's scary, but it's important.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be able to do that. There are second acts now. We live longer, we stay healthy longer. God forbid if a car doesn't hit us, if a rare disease doesn't hit us. And that there's just so much experimentation going on in our industry that you could get stale. And that also when new management comes in, they could be the nicest people in the world. It happened to me, all good human beings. You were the old way of doing things. Yeah. And you got to be able to accept that it's not, you were NPR for everybody. And that doesn't mean you get to be WNPR for life forever till you croak.
And by the way, Paul, I'm so glad that you said that, because I think that is a big thing you have to come to terms with, whether it's this job or any other job, right?
I felt that way at the New Haven Advocate. You're not the
this place doesn't need you. It's been good to be here. I was good to the place. The place was great to me. But things will move on. Things always have to move on, and things have to freshen up over time and change. And sometimes that means they're going to change for the better, and sometimes that means they're going to go away.
And also, it's the work is so much more important than the ego, the person, or the institution. So you have so much talent with radio and community, and you've already told me about all sorts of people you're talking to, the great jobs you're going to be doing in the future, and especially now with creative destruction, where instance crash and burn. We all thought we got our morning newspaper, afternoon newspaper, and listened to one radio show. We got it now.
Yeah.
A million places we get it, and every year, every 6 months, some new outlet is producing information in a new way.
Well, and we're making things for people where they are, which is good. I mean, in my business, we started podcasting 10 years ago, and we started providing the programs that we do on demand for people to listen to whenever they wanted to. The problem is that it's hard to track how those people engage with the programming. So it's hard to, I hate this word, but it's hard to monetize it, right? Find a way to get money in because we don't know where people are listening. So it has been completely disrupted. So what do? Well, you try a lot of new things. One thing that I think isn't going to work is just doing the same old damn thing for another 25 years. That is not going to work. And that's one of the things looking at the horizon of my business, whether it's the media, whether it's journalism, whether it's radio, non-commercial radio. In 25 years, it probably won't exist at all. In 5 years, it's going to be completely different. It's better to get out and try to figure out how to do these things a little differently now, as opposed to even 5 or 10 years from now, because man, it will be hard to get back into it.
I watch the younger people. I watch the Tom Breens and the Lucy Gelmans and people like that who it's more natural for them to be able to figure out what's different, how to do things a lot of different ways. Like I had to learn to be a reporter, and I'm still not great at all this, who takes video and photos and writes the notes and can do a story all at once. Whereas for them, I know it took 2 minutes. But it's kind of fun. Like I have a strong bias on this, John. When I hear you talking about it, I feel this is the greatest time to be a journalist in my lifetime, easily, because of all the new ways to tell stories, the new ways to reach people, and it's just fun. And you can accomplish why you went into the business so much better, connecting with people, getting good information, and not being the story yourself, even when you're using the first person. But everybody gets to weigh in and craft it. So I'm thinking of NPR since you've been in the business. So now people get NPR so many different ways, right? I have my NPR app. People listen to podcasts later. They, I look at NYC in New York. They raise so much money. They're a huge empire now. They have to deal with their Me Too stuff sometimes that like throws all those great plans off track. But,
it does.
But so you listen to live radio, which is still important, right? So in the car, which is a big place, isn't that sort of your base when you're at NPR, right?
Yeah.
So in New Haven, in
absolutely.
Connecticut, the place people more often than not get their news, listen to discussion is in the car, right?
Yeah, I mean, if people are watching here, you see these are the tent poles, right? Morning drive, afternoon drive, morning edition, all things considered. This is where people are stuck in their cars. And that's where people, not just in Hartford, but in every metro area around the state. It's in New Haven, it's in New York, it's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You listen in the car in the morning and you listen in the car in the afternoon. That's even changing. Obviously, new cars are coming out with new technologies that are allowing you to stream satellite to stream,
and you can access
what's
the web,
happening,
right?
Accessing the web. And in a couple of years, the idea of traditional terrestrial radio, a stick in the air that broadcasts out to places, it's going to be a lot less important, but it's still very important to millions of people. So you got to still serve that audience. You got to serve that audience in what I call a linear stream.
It's not yet AOL dial-up.
Absolutely not. Not at all. No, that's the thing. There's still, that's where most of the people are, right? But that pot is shrinking all the time. The thing about public radio that's interesting, right, Paul, is if you look at all the media across America, there's this pretty steep decline. There's all this competition. So people are finding things in different ways. Almost any traditional media company is seeing this steep decline over the course of time. Public radio is it's declining, obviously, in its terrestrial radio, but it's very, it's not dramatically at all. It's very, very, very steady. NPR has grown its revenue around podcasting substantially. If you listen to NPR,
that's what I mean.
You
NPR...
hear all those spots where they say such and such is made possible by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Look, that's where they still get a lot of their money. But more revenue comes in from their podcasts.
Because they can put real ads, mamish ads.
So here's the problem. Yeah. The problem for public radio stations is NPR is now able to take the dollars that we send them from the member station land, right? That you give $60 or $100 or $1,000 a year. I'm not going to turn this into a pledge drive. And then
you'll never get out of your system. You're going to be 95 years old with assisted living, and they say, "Do you want some more insulin?" You go, "Yeah," and $5 will get you a tea mug. Yeah.
But I think but this is the thing is that with this ability for NPR to jump over us and get their content directly into people's ears through podcasts, it does put member stations like WNPR, Connecticut Public Radio, or WSHU in a really tight spot. What do we do? Because we still have to find money from members to support all the things that we do locally, and we still have to send some money to NPR, but NPR is increasingly taking listeners and just they're, getting things straight on their iPods. So
I wondered, why hasn't NPR in Connecticut built more local ties? Like, for instance, why are we doing videos of every show and you're not? Why are most of our people watching us on video?
That's a great question. I will say, I
It's
know
hard being statewide.
I know full well that Connecticut Public is trying really hard to get more video of more of the radio shows done. We've done some of it. We've dabbled in it.
Don Imus did this a quarter century ago.
Don Imus and Howard Stern did this a long time ago. And we can do more of that. I mean, one question is, what's the actual audience reach? How many people do you actually reach when you do that? But because the costs are low,
quality too, and also they then send you the questions, because you did do Tony Harp on video, and you got stuff when I was there in the studio. You got a lot of people right in, and you're right. If you did it, you might get 10,000 people live watching it, and another 20,000 people later on the video. But also the idea is you got to spread it out among a lot of folks. But then you're right. You got the car thing, so we can't do the car thing.
That's right.
So even though we are terrestrial radio, that's not our main way of reaching people, except sometimes at drive time with Joe Ugly and Babs. And so, for instance, if you're at a traffic light and you're hearing a really good part of one of our shows, if you do have to make a right turn, you're going to lose it mid-sentence, whereas you guys are statewide.
Or at least statewide. But again, that is slowly going away over time. And so we're stuck in this weird place where we know that it's changing, and we can't completely go toward this new model of how we
because you still got to do
broadcast.
DNN. Like WTNH is big on the web, but they're still radio. The register's trying pathetically sometimes, but not doesn't successfully doing the web, but they're still print. They own that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to do both things for now. And so the question is, what are the other things that we can do to get to our audiences? So for us, more live events, try to get out and talk to the public in person more often. This is something that I love to do.
Already. Those were great.
We've done a lot of them, and I'm hoping to do more of those in whatever my next act is, because I think people want to interact directly with. People want to get together and talk. I found that more and more over the years. The beauty of radio when I started was, talking to a microphone and knowing that there are thousands or maybe millions of people listening to everything that you're saying, and you're in a room by yourself. Like, there's some power, and it's really cool. It's very special. But then the more I did it, the more I realized that the in-person connection of being in a place with people where they can look at you and talk to you afterward, or talk to you during the program, that there's something that's different and very vital about that. And it's okay to have a little bit of both, right? You have to do some of the first thing, some of the second thing. You have to put some of it on video, and some of it should just be for your ears. One problem I will tell you, Paul, with
some great kind of old-fashioned storytelling, the great podcasts like Invisibilia.
Yeah.
Then you can be cooking, and it's like the old-time radio hours, which has really been brought back, that high quality.
But it's cooked for your ears. It's made specifically to go into your ears and into your brain and paint a picture for you. And I think that if you get into a world in which you say, well, everything has pictures and words and audio and this, you lose the craft. It's like, look, if you've been a writer your whole life. If you write a piece for a magazine that's meant to be sat down and read, you are crafting that story differently, honestly, than something that you mean to read on your phone very, very quickly, or something that is going to be said by somebody on the radio. On radio, you're trying to craft something for someone's ears. And so you need to have a place for that too. That's not video first.
And every place sort of is a combination.
Yeah.
So we'll have some stories where we just put 8 pictures up and just write those, but other times it's text.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the future of radio and the future of John Dankosky
on
Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM, your home for community radio, 103.5 FM if you're at the right traffic light, and live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Let's talk about what happened when you grew up in radio. So you grew up in Pittsburgh?
I did.
What part?
So I grew up in a town just outside of Pittsburgh called Murraysville. My parents, my mom is from Squirrel Hill, not too terribly far from the site of the synagogue shooting. It's a part of town I know really, really well. My dad grew up in a steel town south of Pittsburgh called Monessen. Kind of, now at this point, kind of a sad town. A lot of the jobs left Monessen late 70s, and it hasn't really bounced back a whole lot. I was lucky enough to grow up in a little suburb that was one of the early suburbs outside of Pittsburgh. It was farmland, and built some houses out there. And so I grew up basically in the East Hills. loving the Steelers and the Pirates and the Penguins, going into downtown for fun and to go to the amazing museums. And I've always felt a very strong connection. It's a great town. It's a beautiful city. It really is.
And you grew up listening to radio. And in fact, there was a local guy on radio just in Pittsburgh named Fred Rogers, right? And wasn't he one of your first radio inspirations?
Oh, well, yeah, he was, Fred Rogers, of course, was, this is Mr. Rogers, and this is the song I sang at the start of the show. So Mr. Rogers, worked for WQED TV. He was, for those of you
TV.
who is TV, but if you haven't seen the movie about Mr. Rogers, you really should, because it tells you a story about a guy who really understands how children work and how to talk to children in a way that other people hadn't figured out before. But you also learn an awful lot about Pittsburgh and the environment that Fred grew up in the place where he was. I mean, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was literally my neighborhood. That was the neighborhood my mom grew up in, right? And so I feel a very strong connection. It wasn't
literally your neighborhood.
It wasn't literally my neighborhood, but it was literally my mom's neighborhood, and it felt like my neighborhood. But I grew up with Fred Rogers on television, and I grew up with KDKA Pittsburgh. KDKA was the first commercial broadcasting station, and it was a big, 100,000 watt flamethrower AM station. And before they went to, all right-wing talk and all the stuff that happened over the course of the last couple of decades, it was the place where, you'd hear the Pirates games and you'd hear, middle-of-the-road music and DJs. And I loved it. I loved listening to it. I loved listening to the news breaks.
And did you think when you were young that's what you want to do?
I did. I mean, there were a couple influences. KDKA was certainly one of them. They had a program called 90 to 6, and it was the 90 minutes before 6 o'clock.
That's what it sounded like.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounded like. And and they do news, and I was always fascinated by how they put together the news packages. You'd hear different reporters and voices, and I'd think, is that on tape or is that live? Is that person actually talking to me now, or is that somebody that was recorded earlier? I was fascinated by that. I'd sit under the covers with a little transistor radio, because at night, AM travels a lot further.
I remember the covers. I remember that. I remember late at night hearing stations from with this little box transistor from states away.
Yeah, where'd you listen to? What did you pick up?
Well, I listened to WABC. I was in New York, but once I was at camp in Maine, and I got to hear ABC back home.
Yeah,
when I was a little boy at like after it was dark.
Yeah, I listened to stations out of St. Louis and out of Chicago, and so it was magical, the idea. And I got a shortwave radio. I listened to radio broadcasts from all over.
Radio as a kid.
I love this stuff, and a lot of your listeners will remember. Some of them won't. A program called WKRP in Cincinnati, which is a pretty dopey comedy, but it was a fictional radio station. It seemed like the coolest place in the world to work.
Oh, WKRP had dreams.
Yeah, WKRP in Cincinnati.
Roland Perot writes in, thank you for listening, Roland, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name. John Dankosky, I look forward to discovering your next chapter. Great discussion about the challenges at NPR and your motivation. Thanks for always being that calming voice in my radio. Yes, calming and smart. I agree with that, Roland. Roland. When did you start working in radio? So I started working when I was about 18. I went to school at Duquesne University, a little Catholic school in Pittsburgh. And they had a campus radio station. They had two campus radio stations. One was the college station, WDRS, where you'd play long record. You'd play like Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells and Led Zeppelin records. And then the other station where was the local NPR station, WDUQ. And so WDUQ was in the process of transitioning from a station that had a few full-time employees and a lot of students to being a more professional staff. A lot of public radio was doing that at that time. They were trying to professionalize. Early 80s? This would have been late 80s, 1987, 88. And I was lucky enough to come on board as a student worker at first, getting paid like whatever they paid students at the time, $1.90 an hour. Minus 20. To work. I'd work on air for 8 hours, and then I'd work off air for 8 hours, and I'd take the logs, I'd do engineering. And then I got a job as the music director, and I was taking care of the jazz collection. We had a jazz collection of like 100,000 records. We'd been a jazz station since, the 1950s. And so I was helping the DJs pick out jazz records. And then I got asked to host Morning Edition for an hour. So I was hosting Morning Edition. And you were in heaven. Oh, we wanted to buy news breaks. Oh man! So we did news. We did. Then I'd come on, and the show that started after Morning Edition was called The Bright Side, and it was a jazz show, and I played jazz because the evening show was called
the night side. And we played records and talked live to jazz
You
artists.
said we. You keep saying we.
Yeah.
It felt like community when you're a radio station. Radio
Oh,
station
man.
felt like a team,
It's a family. Oh, it was always a family. It was always a
so
family.
what's the day you'll never forget there when you were starting out, when you said, boy, this is it? Because I had days like that too, writing as a teenager for my local paper. Did you feel like I'm in heaven now?
Okay, so I mean, there's a ton of them. I mean, I used to do live interviews with jazz artists, amazing stuff. But the one that I'll remember is, we talked about fundraising before. Fundraising is a hallmark of public radio, right? A couple times a year, you got to come on and give the phone number and have people give you money. There's a big rivalry. Sports fans will know this, between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and the Browns fans hate the Steelers, and the Steelers fans hate the Browns. And so we worked with WCPN in Cleveland, and we said, let's do our fundraisers at exactly the same time. And we'll have a race to see who can raise, I don't even remember what our goal was, raise the money, and whoever gets there first wins the WDUQ WCPN challenge. And so we went on the air, and we just talked and talked and talked. And when we got down near the end, it was close. And we were, back in the day, there was no internet or whatever. We're on the phone talking to each other, trying to figure out who's got what. I think I did about, 2 hours of just live talking on the radio, asking people for money.
How did you avoid
standing up? What's that?
How'd you avoid dead air?
You just kept going. You just keep talking.
Filibustering.
And that's it. But it's easy when you're fundraising. It's just, you give the phone number. You say, you got to do this. Here's a mug. Here's a tote bag. And you just go and go. We lost by a very small margin. But I thought that was one of the coolest things. And the idea that you could hold air for that long. Before we came in, you were talking about Babs and just the ability to talk to so many different people on the radio, and just hold air and be able to be thoughtful on a number of different topics. That's a skill, man. There's something about that. And
you got it.
I learned that very early on. And
do you remember a lesson? Do you remember an older person in radio who taught you something that you had for your whole life? The way you taught us about resets?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a few of those guys, John Boyle, who sadly passed, but Kevin Gavin, who is still there.
What's something they taught you one day?
Well, I think more than anything else, it's sort of dumb, but it's just to pay very close attention to the things that you're doing, because they actually really matter. The small things make a big difference. I mean, we did election night one year, and I wasn't thinking as clearly as I should have about what tape. We used to have these carts, a stack of carts, and they were basically little 8-track tapes that you'd put in those? With like 30-second. And if you got the wrong thing on the cart, there wasn't just like today, just pulling up the next file. It was a whole process to get the card out and do everything. And I was being too lackadaisical. And Kevin came in and yelled at me, and he said, we just have to do better. Because the point is that, election night, you just did it. Everyone's working their butts off. Everyone's out there. They're trying to get information. It's cold. They're unhappy. They're not having people talk to them, and they're getting stuff in. And if you don't honor the fact that all the rest of your team, all the rest of your family's working hard, and you kind of let them down, it sinks the whole ship. And so you got to be, you can't be the weak link in the chain there. And so that was something that always stuck with me. And I always think about Kevin punching the door on the way out after yelling at me. And I think to myself, I don't ever want to have that happen again.
I'll never forget the pep talk I got from Russ Knight at WLI in 1996. Do you remember him?
I don't know.
He was in the 60s, a Connecticut DJ who did sort of when the Beatles hit and everything. And he'd tell me old stories about they'd come and put the cocaine on the record so he'd play it more. And his career was over. He was like WOLD, Harry Chapin. His last job, they brought him to ELI when they were moving to talk radio.
Yeah.
He's trying to invent himself as a hot talk radio guy. I was a lefty journalist. I thought, I hate what these Rush Limbaugh people are doing. Oh, come on, I could be just as mouthy on the left. So I did a show with Tom Scott, who's a right-wing guy.
Yeah.
And then on election night, and so Russ Knight used to always bring me on his show because he didn't have much to talk about. And he'd want to make fun of me for being a Yalie because he never met anyone from Yale. So we'd go on radio and he'd say, oh, you Yale people are so stupid, blah, blah. And Tom Scott would do that too. If I was winning an argument, he'd say, Yale, because. So then we did an election night thing and they had a bunch of people on and Russ was hosting it. And I thought I was supposed to be mouthy like everybody. And I was like being so obnoxious and like almost shouting. And there was a break and he took me outside like old man to young guy in his 30s starting in radio. And he said, use that Yale brain. And he always thought he was like this anti-Yale guy. He said, in other words, like, we don't have anything smart to say. Don't we yell and try to interrupt each other. But what you should do is say something smart. It doesn't mean be fancy, use big words, talk down to people. but that used substance. And it wasn't really about Yale. He was saying that even though he was a dummy on radio, even though he wasn't a dumb person,
Mhm.
and he was trying unsuccessfully to resuscitate his career through cheap right-wing talk,
Yeah.
he was telling me that what people really will value is substance.
Yeah.
And I realized decades later with the internet and podcasts, what people are valuing now, it isn't about what your point of view is. It's about genuinity and substance.
Yes.
And I've never forgotten that with Russ Knight.
That is a great.
The late
That's
Russ
a
Knight.
great lesson. That is a great lesson to learn. And I think that those are the sorts of things that when they happen earlier in your career, they stick with you, and you think, okay, that's something I just need to keep resetting to. Like
But that's been your whole career. You've never been showy or phony or just cheap. You've always been relaxed, substantive, and prying in a very polite way. And that's and I'm so excited that what you did over NPR is you made that the #1 radio in the state for news talk over all that noise.
Well, I mean, I appreciate it, and like it was fun to do. I come back to Fred Rogers, right? Like Mr. Rogers, he taught you that you really can be polite and you really can respect other people. And yeah, you're going to get angry sometimes, but you have to.
Have you ever
sort
gotten
of channel
angry on
it.
air? Because I can't picture John Dankosky
I don't know that I ever have really gotten angry on air.
Did anyone
I've
ever
gotten
piss you
frustrated.
off, and did you take a deep breath on air and resisted from saying what you really thought of the person?
Yeah, I mean, look, I certainly was challenged a couple times by people, and I wish I could remember some very specific instances.
Well, you interviewed John Rowland, right?
I interviewed John Rowland.
Although I always found that fun.
I had a harder time, frankly, with Dan Malloy because I think he
was
came
a hair
on.
shirt. No matter what you thought of him, and I thought pretty highly of him. Total hair shirt. You couldn't like if he was like giving you a birthday cake, you'd be mad at him.
And this is the thing. We just got into it a couple times, and I think he took exception to a couple questions that I asked him, and I took exception to the way
governor, by the way.
And that's the way. And
well,
that's
what
the
was
way
it about? Do you remember the day or what happened? Because he'd always started with "I'm going to push back," which is basically FY. Get ready. Yeah.
It was a story had broken that he was in during one of the many times that he had to, because of the state of the state budget, had to call for kind of fiscal austerity or shared sacrifice, right? The story had come out that he had authorized something like a 12% raise for a number of people on his staff, including folks in Ben Barnes' office.
He was the director of budget.
Director of budget. And I challenged him. I just thought, how does that work? How does it work that we have, that you're basically asking everyone else to take a haircut here, and these guys are going to get 12%. And he took great exception to it. And we sort of just said, we'll kind of agree to disagree. And, you get your voice gets a little tighter.
Did you go to a commercial break or something? Oh, you don't have commercials.
We don't really have commercials.
But you had your resets.
We have our resets, and, we go to break eventually and it come back, and, and we were able to have a good conversation after that. He was nice enough on my last day on the air on WNPR. He called into Colin McEnroe's show to wish me well. I
told he respected you.
I know. Well, we had a good time, but those things were hard. And you know what it is? It was harder with people who you respect and who you actually want to have you can have a good conversation
because you care
with.
what the other one thinks about. Your biggest fights are always the people who you respect.
It doesn't matter at all when someone's just a jerk. And
right.
It doesn't
it's kind
matter.
Of fun.
You tell them to go away. That's not a big deal.
Who was your favorite guest you ever had?
My most favorite interview was not in the studio. I was asked to do a live radio event at the Litchfield Jazz Festival, and I got to interview Dave Brubeck on stage at the Litchfield Jazz Festival.
Wow!
And he was.
So you love jazz?
I'm a huge jazz fan, and Brubeck was a big. My dad was a huge Brubeck fan, and so I grew up with his records. And he pulled up in a little golf cart. It's at the Goshen Fairgrounds. So it was in a big area, and he came across in this golf cart. At that point, he was 88 years old, and I had to help him up on stage. And he was there with Paquito de Rivera, the great saxophonist, the Cuban saxophonist. And so what the conversation we had was with Paquito, who had fled Cuba, and with Dave, who had taken his integrated quartet behind the Iron Curtain on a U.S. State Department mission to try to bring jazz to Poland and to parts of Russia. And it was enlightening, and he was very thoughtful. They were both very thoughtful. But I just remember sitting there thinking that I was talking to Dave Brubeck on the radio for people. And my parents had come up to visit just randomly. And so I had them in the audience. And the idea that I was talking to Dave Brubeck in front of my dad and mom was mind-blowing. It's still...
So you still felt awe.
Yeah.
As a professional, done this your entire adult life with someone you really admired.
Of course. Absolutely. I mean...
How was the interview?
The interview was really good.
Did he say anything that interested you?
Well, I think the main thing was that because of the dynamics of them, we were really talking about the role of arts in bringing people together and helping to bridge divides, right? And like the role that his music played, both in because it was an anniversary of his trip behind the Iron Curtain, both in this jazz diplomacy, but also the thing that people don't think about, this sort of bookish, white jazz pianist. He had an integrated quartet that he toured through the South at a time when you didn't tour through the South with an integrated jazz quartet. And we talked about all that stuff. And I just remember thinking that it's why I do this, right? And yes, I was in awe, but just feeling like, yeah, we got this. This is actually, this is actually something that I will remember for the rest of my life. And I absolutely have.
We're talking with John Dankosky, quarter century, the voice of Connecticut Public Radio. Now moving on to his new chapter, talking about that here on Dateline, New Haven. WNHH, your home for community radio, 102.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. What brought you up to Connecticut Public Radio 25 years ago?
My first of all, my wife, I was in Pittsburgh, didn't really want to leave, but my wife, my girlfriend at the time, got a job up in Boston, and I decided to follow her up there, take the plunge. I worked in commercial radio in Boston for a couple of years.
Love what you hear.
Yeah, I worked at a station on the North Shore of Boston in Beverly. It's called WBOC, WBOQ 104.9 FM, and it was a commercial classical station. And so I was a...
Those are odd adjectives to have next to each other.
Oh, truly. Well, and it's not a classical station anymore, let's put it that way. But the commercial classical, we played classical music all day, and I was the afternoon drive time host, and I hosted a show called Look Who's on the Radio, which was, and this is commercial, right? So we had commercial sponsors on to talk about their favorite classical music.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, it was awful. It was the worst. It was the worst radio show in America. It was. We'd have people like the local car dealer come on, and he didn't have any. He didn't have any favorite classical. So I'd pick out his favorite classical music, right? And we'd be like,
it's like Ronald Reagan when this feed cut to the baseball game and he claimed it was a foul ball. Oh my God!
So we did that, and it was a great training ground because when what you're given is a framework of, okay, you've got commercial sponsors, you have to have them on, you have to play classical music, and then you have an interesting conversation with them about both their work, which is maybe owning a car dealership, and classical music. It was really learning, how to do this.
That's great
training.
I
did that for a couple years, and a job opened up at Connecticut Public Radio. They needed a morning edition host.
Oh,
they were going to finally put together a news department. They didn't really have one. They were a classical music station with some local news. At the time, of course, they had, and many of your listeners and viewers will know Faith Middleton. Faith Middleton had basically invented, non-commercial talk radio here. She'd been doing it for years already. She was on the radio, and Faith's show was the only real local thing we did other than play classical music. So they hired me to be the morning edition host, and I was there by myself. There was no other reporters. There were no editors. So I would take some time and do little features on the side, and I started calling up NPR to pitch my stories, in part because I wanted to get my stories on National Public Radio, but in part because I needed an editor, right? So people like Andre De Leon and Libby Lewis at NPR took me under their wing and showed me how to edit news stories. And so I would get on little crazy news stories from Connecticut on...
What would be an example of something you would report while being kind of stuck in the office? How'd you do it? Give me a story.
Well, I would do morning edition, and then I'd run out and do a story that I pitched to them that for some reason they took was a story about a virtual reality dentistry. And of course, again, this is 1994.
Well,
so
they had
virtual, well, as such as it was.
3D glasses, maybe.
It was basically 3D glasses, right? And so it was a dentist in, I don't know, it was Shelton or someplace, right?
That's a little scary. The dentist with 3D glasses.
And I go to this dentist's office, and basically, I get tape of him with his hygienist and, an expert talking about how virtual reality is going to change the world and how it's helping to soothe these patients as they're doing the dental work. And typically of how things have changed, Paul, right? If anybody brought me that story today, I'd be like, oh, hell no, that's just not a story. And if
I disagree.
But if we did do the story,
I think it's a horror
If I did
film.
do the story, it'd be like a 3-minute story. It'd be a little tiny postcard, maybe 2.5 minutes. I had like 7 minutes on the radio with that thing, because that's the old NPR, right? You just go on and on and on. So stories like that, I did
WNHH.
Exactly. but I covered a lot of interesting things, and I covered politics, and I just went out there and did it. And over time, we started to build a news operation around me. We just hired more people. Ray Hardman, who's the All Things Considered host, was hired a couple of years later. Diane Orson was already there. She was the producer of. She's amazing. She was the producer of the Faith Middleton show, and I brought her over to be a reporter. And so we just started to build a team. Yeah, Lori Mack. Lori Mack was the producer of Faith Middleton for years, and now she's a criminal justice reporter, award-winning. National award-winning. So we built it up over time, and eventually in 2005 we turned to an all news operation. We just said, the classical music is great for someone else, and we'll do news. And so we started doing news and started doing the show Where We Live, all at the right time. Just honestly, Paul, right around the time the Ned Lamont Joe Lieberman race happened,
2006.
2006. So there was a lot happening to cover.
Bob McCormick, an old radio guy himself, says radio has sure changed a lot. Thanks for listening, Bob. Thanks for weighing in. So let's fast forward. So you did Where We Live, which was a fantastic daily show. We were all listening for the only substantive statewide, really in-depth discussion of what's happening in our state. So fast forward from that first virtual reality story to the massacre in Newtown. Yeah. Now you were the voice, okay? If someone wanted to have NPR of Connecticut, what are we going to do about this? Which was sort of like our mini 9/11 almost in Connecticut. Yeah. It touched people so deeply, feel like the world was changing, such grief. What did you do with 9/11 with Where We Live?
Yeah, it was, well, first of all, it really was, you say it was like our 9/11. As I think more about that event, it touched so many people so deeply because of the magnitude of what it was, because of the way in which it unfolded. But also, my wife's a preschool teacher, and almost every preschool and high school and middle school and elementary school in the state, when that happened, was either locked down or scared to hell. Just everyone was like, "What's going on?" And so, the whole state is kind of frozen about this. So, on Where We Live, we did just a series of conversations, but then me and my friend Colin McEnroe, we went on the air in the middle of the day and we opened up the phone lines. So we worked very closely with NPR and said, look, we're going to have some reporters. Jeff Cohen, who's now our news director, was the lead reporter at the time. We're going to work with our station, WSHU, WNYC, and NPR, and we're going to make sure that we get all the stories that need to be covered, right, out of this terrible tragedy for the local, for the regional, for the national audience. But what that meant, giving a lot of that over to NPR, was that we were able to, on Where We Live and on the Colin McEnroe show and on our specials, we're able to do something that was really needed, was give people a place to talk.
That's what radio is. With all the changes, that's what radio began as. That's what it's about, right?
It's a place. I mean, there's only a few things you can do. There's only a few reasons why live radio makes any sense, right? You can report on what's happening right now as it's happening, right? And you can talk back to it. You can call into the radio station, and you can email it now, and you can interact. Those are the only two reasons to go live. Everything else can be on tape. But this was a reason to go live. So we did that for a whole week, and we had a lot of, we let people grieve.
And talk about what it meant.
And I think
people
that
were
was
calling nonstop, right?
People were calling. We had some news along the way, but more than that, we just let people talk. The week after the event of course happened on a Friday at 9:30. The governor said, we're going to ask all the church bells across the state to chime at 9:30.
That's why I brought this up.
Yeah. And so what we decided was, we just can't possibly have a call-in show that breaks at 9:30 for this incredibly powerful moment. We can't, frankly, talk for even another moment about guns or gun policy. So we got together with our producers, Tucker Ives, Eugene Amatruda, and we very quickly assembled this amazing concert at the Silent Hill Congregational Church. My friend Kate Callahan, the folk singer, the folks from Goodnight Blue Moon, the amazing band here.
They're playing a concert in 2 weeks.
I love these people. Noah Behrman, the jazz pianist, Stephen Haynes, the improvisational trumpeter. Everyone just threw it and said, we'll do it. And it was, if you've ever put on a concert, ever put on a festival with a whole bunch of different style musicians, it's hard. We did it in a couple days. We did it in a church with no audience. and we're going to do it live on the radio, and we're going to take a break in the middle and make sure that we had the sound of the church bells.
That's beautiful. So you
And
had
that's
the
what we're gonna do.
music of what was happening in the churches around the state be part
Yep.
of this.
And we paused in the middle for the music, and we had every sort of music. We
And how
had
did the tech go?
we had-
Guys, I always screw that up. I've tried to
it
do
was
that.
well. I mean, we had a Comrex feed. You know, we had a
What does that mean?
So it's a digital box that you can broadcast out over the internet. All you need is a good internet connection, and the Comrex linked up to a board, bunch of microphones. And so what we do is we put together a playlist, and we're gonna have the folk singer sing, and then John will maybe say something while we reset, and the improvisational band will play, and then the jazz band will play, and then Goodnight Blue Moon will play. This amazing jazz pianist, Nicole Zaritis, came up from New York City. She grew up in Connecticut, and I'm going to cry. She sang beautiful song. It was an amazing concert, Paul. And I will say, I said it that day, and I've said it since then. It was the most important thing ever put on the radio, because it was important for the people who were there, and it was important for the people who were listening. And honestly, it was one of those moments. It didn't matter if anybody was listening. It just, for the people who were there, it was the sense of, we're doing something in communion in order to help heal. And like, if you can do that, I mean, honest to God, what's better than that? There's nothing better than that.
And it's so inspiring you say that, because just as in our politics, on radio, there's going to lowest common denominator, trying to succeed by making people hate or just feel angry or dumbed down.
Mm-hmm.
But you can succeed just as much, if not more, with the same human beings by reaching for beauty and unity.
Absolutely.
And substance.
That's it. I mean, and it's something that I've always thought about a lot is in equal parts, I think, as we present things on the radio to people, we need to think about three things. We need to think about ways in which we can make people angry righteously. Like, something's going wrong. Like, we need to do something about this, right? That you need to have a certain number of stories like that. And you need to have a certain number of stories that are kind of like my goofy virtual reality story.
Yeah.
That are kind of like, that's interesting. I didn't know people did that. But you need to have that third part of the pie that's just beauty. It's someone reading poetry. It's someone singing a song. It's someone talking about their personal experience.
They had no hope in life, and
That's
they
right.
found a way to find it.
If you don't have those three things in equal parts, and it's all just, let's fix something, or it's all just, hey, gee whiz, then you're missing, I think, the whole piece of the human experience. And that's what we try to do. Like, that's the goal.
All right. We're talking about that goal with John Dankosky, the fixture of Connecticut Public Radio for a quarter century here on WNHH-FM, your home for community radio. Michelle Turner says hello to John.
Hello.
Great to see the young fella retiring. He's not retiring, Michelle. We're going to get to that next segment. Thank you. Just like you, Michelle, still kicking. Remember our brief WELI days, good speed. John, were you at ELI?
I was not at ELI. No.
And I guess you interacted back then.
Yeah.
And Bob McCormick
yeah.
says YBC AM is an NPR station. I didn't know that. But does anyone listen to YBC AM?
Oh, I don't even know.
I didn't even it's just those for the kids.
Yeah,
Anyway,
just for the kids.
So now next, talking about the beauty in radio. What a beautiful way you put that.
Yeah.
So how are you going to do that now? What are you going to do now, John Dankosky? Keeping those same vision, keeping those same goals, still the kid who was listening to the radio and being fascinated by the news breaks and connecting with people and being part of us in radio. Even if we're going to call it radio anymore, what's the next 25 years?
Well, I think part of it is understanding that it's not all just going to be traditional radio. It can't be. I think part of it is understanding that there's a lot of ways in which we can collaborate with each other so that we're not beating each other's heads in over this little scrap of real estate that is, smart, interesting conversation and news coverage, right? I started doing collaborations with other radio stations and other news outlets a long time ago because I really just firmly believe that while competition is important and it still drives an awful lot of good, collaboration is stronger and it's more important now than ever.
I love that.
And there's not enough money and time and space and talent to go around to have everyone on different teams shooting arrows at each other. And so, I found
we are in one team in Connecticut Media. There's no question. Even though we compete for stories, we're one team.
You got to be one team. And when I started the New England News Collaborative with friends from other stations, we said we're going to get the public radio stations around the region working together. And so that's going to continue with Connecticut Public Radio and with all these stations, even in my absence. And I'm going to keep interfacing with it. I'm working right now toward a really cool election project that not completely ready to unveil, but a whole
So
bunch of
does something
stations.
to do with a certain election taking place a year from
It
now?
does. It's a certain. I don't know if anybody's paying attention.
That's going to consume our
is-
every minute and send us to psychiatrists and out of windows every 30 minutes.
Well, but I think that here's the key, Paul, is I think that it is if we let it, and if we make it about, you know, what's going to happen. What did this last Tuesday, tell us about what's going to happen next year? If we make it about, you know, how are the Trump voters reacting? No, look, we need to think about what people actually care about in America, in New Haven, in Connecticut today. And we need to figure out how we can talk about that in a way that's constructive and hopefully somewhat solutions oriented. And we need to get at that more quickly than we did last time, because I think we missed the boat on that last time by a long shot.
So what kind of, I know you can't deal with the details,
Yeah.
but you're talking about doing something where?
Well, I think what we're talking about doing is working with stations around New England and also around the country tied into this larger thing, in which we have more conversations out in the public with audiences.
So John Dankosky, for the next year, you're going to be involved in radio regionally with something involved in the election innovative way.
I think that is fair to say.
And you're doing other stuff too, right?
Yeah. I've been working for years with my friends at the Connecticut Mirror, the great online news service. I'm hoping to do some live events with them over the course of this next year.
I love your live events.
You know, I think that they're fun. I love to get out in front of an audience. I almost always do something at the New Haven Festival of Arts and Ideas, and looking forward to doing something on stage again this year. I think that they're going to make democracy a big focus of what they're doing. I'm interested in collaborating with more media organizations around the country. I love doing this stuff. I work with my friends at Science Friday on.
Are you still filling in as a host?
I still fill in periodically and talk with them all the time about, you know, what they're doing, trying to get more public radio reporters onto Science Friday, which is a big thing I love to do. So, yeah, I want to keep at all these things, you know.
Well, I'm sure you're going to hit it out of the park with everyone.
Thank you, sir.
And every other sports metaphor that doesn't involve concussions or bruised knees. John Dankosky, thank you for all the great work you've done in Connecticut.
Thank you, Paul.
Looking
Thank you
forward
so
to all the great stuff you're going to do. And thank you for being here this last hour and just inspiring us about the magic, the power, and the beauty of radio.
Well, this is inspirational. Thank you, Paul, very much for having me again. And congratulations on everything you've done here.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. The comments. Thanks to the miracle man behind the controls, station manager Harry Dross. You want to talk about the future of radio. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.